welcome, good evening. So you're joining us here in Wiltshire, and a really auspicious moment to begin a conversation with John, which started a little over a year and a half ago, maybe 2 years now, and a mutual friendship and admiration for painting, for which John is one of the greatest exponents working today. It's very rare to have people who've spent a lifetime dedicated to the art of figurative painting, of using paint to canvas. And so it's a very exciting moment to talk about being in front of canvases and the moment of unencumbered possibility that goes with it. And it seems to me that in getting to know your practice a little bit, that's how you start a series. It's sort of, and I'd love you to talk about this, but I can't help feeling I've seen it in the way that you completely clean the studio out, you physically go away, and then you come back and it's clean slate. And so looking now, because this period has been a very productive one for you, I know you've said as much. Just could you talk me through, allow us to sort of journey it through your eyes and voice, how you think, and where you start. I don't want to take any more words away that would be better said from you, but I'd love to understand that.
Well, this really has resulted through habitude rather than discourse, what I do and why I do it and how I do it. And there's no doubt now it's in my blood, like Rilke talks about blood remembering. I bring that up later, but it's a habit. And it's one that I thrive on. It's like refreshing the screen. But I'm also somewhat of a chameleon because I deliberately have several branches of work or kinds of projects. For example, in extreme contrast, if we look at what I'm sitting in front of now and compare that with the large life-size version of the Raft of the Medusa, which is 5 meters by 7 meters in black and white. That piece of work, I knew from the very beginning that I could do this piece of work. I felt very confident I could get close to what I wanted to achieve. There was still an element, as there must always be, about I'm doing this because I want to see what it looks like. I mean, this is a very simple answer for lots of artists. Why are you doing this? Because I want to see what it looks like. Because I don't know otherwise. With the Raft of the Medusa, this work, which was so systemic in its process, I had a pretty good idea about how I was going to make it and what it was going to look like. I didn't have a real sense of what the structure of the work would be, or how the experience of being in front of something of that enormity and scale, what that would be like. So there was still that element of doubt, if you like. But the point I want to make is that to make that picture, it took me a year. I devised a kind of program as to 24 panels, equal size, all with various degrees of tonality, from very thin, almost gossamer thin and transparent wax with a very small amount of black pigment in it, through to something that was more like tar, if you like, or bitumen. I had to do this in a very organized way. The mixing of the pigment, once I started this, I had to finish it on that day. I had to put them away in the right place. And I knew once I started, I couldn't stop. So it literally took me a year. And about a third the way through, of course, and I knew I was going to feel like this, I felt, why the hell did I do this? Because it's very hard, you know, to keep going. And it was at times incredibly boring. But I knew it was worth doing. There it is. I knew it was worth doing because I wanted to see what the experience would be in front of my version of this painting, my reflection of the original painting. So I just pushed on with it. And there were moments I recognized too, where it was in one sense, it was a lot easier because I didn't get twisted or torn around in the process of making it. It was just a regimented practice, but with incredible discipline. And I have to say, quite a good level of skill to make it all work at the end. When we come back to this, these are completely different. So, I mean, I'm not saying I went from that to this, but this happens. I choose to do things like this. And then this piece of work is completely different in the sense that I had an idea with these works that it was time again for me to return to the self-portrait. I've never really called them self-portraits. I've called them heads. I've called them head, SP, head, self-portrait. Because some of them are barely recognizable as portraits, quite abstract. Others are very figurative. So there's a huge range in how they might appear. Some of them look like me, some of them are just head-like. They could be, you know, anyone. None of them are non-referential. That's the difference. So with the work I'm in front of, this is one of 16, I thought this is my 5th or 6th return to the head self-portrait. And each body of work over the last 3 decades is distinct. It's very different from the previous one. They're all different. If we put them together, we'd see the differences. Because I always want to try and do something that I haven't seen before, the most important thing, or done before. So to do something that perhaps I haven't seen before, to find out what it's like, I've got to find another way of going about it. So I decided that I would go about these works I thought I was very clever at the time when I thought of this. I thought, I'm going to rid myself of any reference points. So I'm going to do these portraits in like a naked studio. I'm going to kind of blow away everything that I have, and I'm going to have a void from which I will work, and I will make these portraits. So no mirrors to look into, no previous drawings, no photographs, no films, no nothing, just the blank canvases and the paint.
And a great place to start.
Well, you say that, but it's a great place to start, but I was completely and utterly stuck. And the first thing I felt like doing was going to grab one of my books or looking at some portraits, but I said, no, I can't do it.
Yeah. So do you find yourself having to willfully steer away? Let's say with the raft, the techniques that I'm sure you had to learn in the run to making that piece, the language, the brush strokes, the mark making, the integration of color and bitumen and thinness of paint. Do you then have to willfully, if you found yourself referencing those techniques, would you willfully steer away from it in this next body of work, for example, or would you say, oh, that's interesting?
No,
that's something I remember picking up.
The former, move away from it.
You would, yeah. So you'd have to consciously recognize it.
Well, as much as you can, but you can't.
Yeah.
Because back to root again, it's in your blood, it's in your makeup. You can't, and this is the hardest thing. So when I've got all these works around the studio, and I honestly didn't know what to do. So I thought I'd just tint the canvases. I'll just put on some backgrounds. And I deliberately did a few of them in acrylic paint because I thought I would at some stage do something I hadn't done for a long time. That's I'd throw some pigment at them, which I did on some of them. And that kept me busy for a week or so. And then I was stuck again, And I've really stuck, and so tempting to go back to some reference. But there's one thing that you can't obliterate, and that's memory.
Mm.
It's in your system. And I think that helped me a lot. You know, that the wonderful thing that Rilke said, I've written this down because I want to say it as he said it. He said, and still it is not enough to have memories. One must be able to forget them when they are many, and one must have the great patience to wait until they come again. For it is not yet the memories themselves, not until they have turned to blood within us, to glance, to gesture, nameless and no longer to be distinguished from ourselves. Not until then can it happen that in a most rare hour, the first word of a verse arises in their midst and goes forth from them. And he's really talking there. I like it because it's very appropriate to me, because he's talking about old age, really, and experience, you know. And we don't have so many things going for us when you get older, with all the young kids running around. But this puts them back in their place a bit, because this fallacy that, you know, it's really about you experience something and this romantic notion, then you express it. Well, it's not quite as simple as that. As for Rilke, you experience, you memorize, you express, you forget, and then you begin to externalize. He also said something else, which is, I was only thinking about this in the process of doing these paintings, which connects with that. He talked about a visionary landscape. And he said that, these are my words, basically, he said in a very poetic way, that there were certain things, inner thoughts, that he felt he wanted to communicate, but it was extremely difficult to do it, and because they were so complex. And then he found that by taking something from the external world, like a tree or a river or a mountain, and bringing them inside to his inner world, and combining this inner world with the outer world, he created a visionary landscape. And that enabled him to communicate some very complex thoughts. And I was thinking the other day, well, that's true in painting, but more than that in painting for me, and I'm sure a lot of painters would say this, or other artists that use material, because in the end, so much of what we do is about stuff. It's the stuffness of stuff. And if you don't get that, you may as well go home, you know. If you want to make pots, you've got to learn about clay. You've got to wallow in it like a hippopotamus. Or, I mean, I really believe this, the stuffness of stuff. And painting, when that paint hits the surface of the canvas, it's the propulsion that brings that paint onto the canvas or the wall or the floor with a brush or your arm or a cloth or a bucket or whatever is coming from within you. When it hits the canvas, it's externalized. And what it does on the canvas begins a kind of a visionary landscape. And how you manipulate and control and help that world along is the very complex, difficult, but absolutely compelling, challenging thing that will hold you together for the rest of your life. Always believing that next week I'm going to move that paint in such a way that I'm going to create something I've never done before. And if it's not next week, it'll be the month after. And if it's not the month after, it'll be next year. You know, this is it. This is what happens. And I thought that with these works, I sensed a little bit of that, because I deliberately made for myself a kind of impossible beginning. And what really helped me was, this is to do with the memory too, I guess, is I I thought, well, what I'll do now is I'll start making some gestures, some marks on the canvas, but using my arms, all of my arms, and using scrapers where I can start at the bottom of the painting, crouch down, and pull the painting right up top of my toes. And I suddenly saw crucifix type forms in front of me. And then the memory brought about that wonderful picture, image that we all know so well, Leonardo da Vinci's The Truvian Man, which he paid, we called it that because of Vitruvius, who was an ancient architect. His famous book, I think, De Architectura, and he had made he'd made lots of drawings himself because he really felt that the human body and the proportions in the human body were absolutely of value to and manifest throughout architecture, as we know indeed it has. And right back to early Persian art through to now. Now they use it on the stock exchange. When you talk about Fibonacci numbers, you know, it's moved right the way through, or the golden section, or whatever you want to call it. And then when I saw the arms outstretched, the ideal Leonardo had taken the ideal form, the ideal person, perhaps not you and I, but somebody who's got 8 heads into their body, you know, somebody who's like 6'3".
There's such a thing as an ideal.
Long arms, and that was the perfect form. And I just saw immediately there, I saw a direction that would help me. And what I saw was a Roman O. And I remembered the Roman alphabet, which I studied when I was at school. And I remembered the discipline of it. And I remembered at the beginning the discipline and throughout. And at the end, I remembered the freedom that it gave me. And I certainly recognize how that helped me a lot with an appreciation and an understanding of drawing in its broader sense. So that's how I got on to the idea of perhaps looking at proportions of letters and numbers and alphabets. And of course, the whole form of Leonardo's man in this circle, its anatomy. And I think I sent to Hannah Hooks an idea about what I was going to call this work. And I said, I think I'm going to call it 22 Vesalius. And she wrote back and she said, I think I said, do you have any idea what I'm talking about, Hannah? And she wrote back, she said, well, I know Vesalius is a famous founder, so-called, of anatomy, and from the 16th century. And I said, that's right. She said, I have no idea what the 22 is about. I said, it's interesting. 22, I thought I'd use because I'm using, there's more twos in these works than anything else, as it happens. And 22 is the number of bones in the human head. So I thought that was a nice kind of title, that we have 22 Vesalius, huge homage to the Vesalius. And the typography and the anatomy of typography and the anatomy of the human head became a strange kind of typographical hybrid for me. And then I was let loose, and I found that I could try lots of things out by working on a scale which is an imagined enormous head. I mean, nobody's head is this big. Look at my head compared with it. If I was doing a portrait of my head, it's this is like using my hands and my wrists. But doing something this size, I still use my hands and my wrists, but I also use a lot of my body in shaping, in making these works. You know. And sometimes the forms of the letters and the numbers, they were never really descriptive, but there was a nuance of what perhaps the skeletal structure within the head might be. You know, spaces between letters might register as an eye. Horizontals could be part of the mouth. And all the curves are part of our cheeks, our forehead, our jaw, and so on and so forth. But they are made with a series of overlays. Some of the forms are buried, barely visible. Others more prominent, not endangered by me at all. But certainly what happened was a kind of palimpsest of a fracture that created the palimpsest that revealed the whole historical context and process of the painting I had made. And that interests me. I think a lot of people don't know that when you look at paintings, you can look at the painting from like 30 feet away and talk about lots of aspects of it. The narrative, perhaps, or you know, its power. If it's a more abstract work, its associations, the emotional reaction to what you see. But you can also go up to a painting. You can go right up to like 2 inches away, and you can enter another world. You know, and I think that gives painting huge value and resonance. Paintings are also seen from angles, not from just in front. They're also seen in one's periphery. And if they're lucky enough to have them in a domestic situation, or they're lucky enough and wise enough to go to museums often, they're always changing. And they're always seeing something that they'd never seen before. I still find paintings that I've known all my life, but at a particular moment, at a certain time, I'll see this picture like I've never seen it before. I mean, there's this painting in the, not the Prado in Madrid, but the Baron von Thiessen's collection, which had moved from Lugano to Madrid. And there was Cézanne's The Gardener, a painting about that size. And I saw it and I almost fell over. I thought, well, that's what he was doing. And he was doing something that I was trying to do at the time, but he'd done it a long time ago. But I never saw it because it wasn't relevant to me. So this thing of like, if you have a painting at home and you're rushing off to work, or you've had a row with your wife, or the kids have kind of done something that's really annoyed you. I mean, the painting's there. It's there as a part of your fabric and your life force. It has its own life force, and it becomes a part of your life force. So I think that's very exciting. These are not static things. They're still and quiet, brilliant, but so powerful. You know.
You make a very good case for painting at large and art as a whole, I suspect, which would also fulfill under those criteria. And I wonder sometimes whether painting isn't always self-portraiture in some way, metaphysical or literal or otherwise.
I would think so.
Yeah, but it's interesting that you framed this series around the literary Roman alphabet because of your interest, which I suppose I probably haven't pushed up the scale, if you like, of understanding your drivers. But I think the sort of the literary element is a key part. I mean, I think it's there substantiating your logic and thought processes, isn't it? As a way. So seeing the alphabet used in that way, I think is very telling. And it's an extraordinary series. I suspect, although I am no great expert in the topic, but the proportions of the letters are probably followed through the same proportions that you've been outlining as well. They're probably humanist based, aren't they? I would have thought. Certainly, they've all got a bit like ceramics. They've all got sort of anthropocentric titles, haven't they? You've got elbows and ears and feet and necks and shoulders. That's the word to be used to describe elements of them, isn't it? So it's this kind of.
But you know, what is interesting too is that these have been up now, finished if ever a painting's finished, of course. But I'm not going to touch them. I'm not going back to them. And I still don't quite understand what some of them are about or why they are the way they are. And I think that's a very good thing, because I have in the past left the studio, especially if I've gone somewhere to work for 3 months, thinking, well, that body of work needs to be finished, and I'll return to it afresh. And when I've got back and I've looked at the same work, and I thought, well, that is finished. I don't need to do anything to that. And what I thought had been finished, I thought, no, that needs a lot more work. So this is changing all the time. And in as much that, you know, when I come down to Wiltshire, which I'm really looking forward to in October, very different environment, I have a kind of feel for something that I want to do, but I don't know what it is yet. And I don't know how I'm going to do it. And that makes it very exciting. You know,
I think
I'm not going to do anything like I've ever done before, I can tell you that. And if you look across my work, you will, I think you'll see a handwriting. You'll see something which is...
Yeah, no, I think...
but there's a lot of differences. It's all the same thing. What is it? What is it for? It's all about trying to embrace the unfamiliar. You know, trying to move away from the shadow. It's about a dumb intelligence. It's about a tacit knowing.
I think you'd be a very well, you're more cognizant than most about the phraseologies, but I think it really is interesting. I mean, just to sort of encapsulate, and I hope I put you in words that have meaning as well as substance. But you know, you have carried on exploring new language methodology. The framework, when you see your works together over time, make complete sense, or they speak to a continuous, you know, journey or narrative. And you're right about the sort of sedimentary layers, for want of a better phrase, which has sort of taken history and sort of repeated it layer on layer on layer. To your point about experience, and you know, I suspect probably you know, we fear youth as much as youth fears age, in a way, in that sense, isn't it? The two have just very different poles from which to which they're orientating. One can't possibly understand the other. But time does lend these experiences. So it's really interesting, I think, to dwell, if we could, on this important period. I think it's probably the most focused period you told me that you've had in your studio. It's a body of 22 works, which I hadn't accumulated. I think I have 16 in my mind.
No, there are. You're correct. It's 16 works, 22 bones in the head. This is just me being a little naughty and devious. I've always liked the idea of titles causing a little kind of puzzle or confusion. You know, let's not make everything immediately available. Yeah, let's make you work a little bit, and so that's just me having pleasure with the name.
Definitely.
I was going to call it Vesalius, Vitruvius, and Turinus, and Vitruvius being the Truvian man, the architect, 150 years BC, Vesalius, the anatomist. And Turinus is this other person that I discovered recently, who was a 16th century, round about the same time as Vesalius. He was French, and when I say Turinus, that's his Latin name, and I took it because it kind of sounds like a kind of three tenors in the opera, you know. But his actual name is Geoffroy Tory, and he was an engraver and a humanist. And he wanted to print a lot of French material. And at that time, most of what was printed
was
Latin. And so he did an awful lot to the French alphabet. He is really responsible for our serifs and sans serifs and all of the various typefaces that we have. And a very interesting guy. He wrote a book called, if I can find it, because I can't remember. Yes, I've written here, the third player is Turinus, a French humanist and engraver relevant to myself because the book of hours, 1525, published Chanfrey, translated from the French as something like Field of Flowers. He subtitled his work, The Art and Science of the Portion of the Attic or Ancient Roman Letters According to the Human Body and the Face. He believed that the proportions of the alphabet should reflect the ideal human form. So I thought, well, that's right up my street. I need him to come in on this, you know. And of course, once you find that, I mean, you find the history of that right through now, as I said to you earlier, you know.
And this is Turinus.
Thompson's amazing stuff, and Le Corbusier, and right the way through. I mean, it's just incredible. I mean, I never quite understand how all that stuff works, but that ratio of 1.618 to 0.618 that's reflected in almost everything on our planet.
Yeah.
Do you know the number of male bees to female bees in a hive?
43.5.
The number of spirals on a sunflower that way to the ones going that way, and so on.
Yeah.
This, that, you know, so on, right the way through. I loved it. So I thought, well, I'm going to mention him. I'm going to put him in my artist notes.
Fantastic.
Because he then ended up designing from and using the basis of the Roman alphabet, an alphabet for the King of France.
The King of France.
So, there you have it. That
is fantastic. Well, you can't get a higher recognition. I've tried to make a note of him, but I'm calling him Torinos, but that sounds like he should be playing.
They sound like players that fall for Real Madrid.
Italian World Cup final.
Yeah, it does. Once there was Jose Carreras, Placido Domingo, and Pavarotti, and now we've got Torinos, Vesalius, and Vitruvius. Upstage by then.
Brilliant stuff. I think you're a very worthy advocate. So I think, you know, you're right there, centre forward, with them on the wing, crossing balls into. I don't know why I'm carrying on a football analogy, but I think it is about passing on or sharing ideas, you know, both forwards and backwards, and I think it's speaks to me very much about a way that art can hold time and talk about the past and also talk to our future. Now an hour has flown past, and I was conscious that we would love to involve you if you are with us here with a view to catching up and asking John. Now is your chance to ask him the questions I suspect that many people will have in their minds. And I wondered if John, I could just talk, or maybe perhaps more appropriately, introduce what we're doing together now, and put it in people's minds, the future. You say you can't see the future. I don't think I can either. It's been extremely difficult, but I can plan. And we are planning for an amazing future together, which you touched on in terms of the program of time down here, which would be fantastic. And it's really exciting for us to think of this as a period of residency and how memories will be there for you that become in synchronicity with the landscape and the environment around here. That's really important. I think it'll be an important marker to your life, and it's a very important marker to our career, if you like, as an arts event, art space. So that'll be exciting, and that'll be on view in Wiltshire in the new year, as will I think possibly the most challenging art installation we will have yet achieved. And bear in mind, we've installed
Anna, you have to make sure that the barn is wide enough for this. I've asked Johnny a few times, are you sure this is big enough? Yes, it is.
I'm absolutely certain.
We're also going to have with that another historical reference with Stubbs is Whistledown.
Yes, that's a wonderful work. So I really think it's a wonderful time for painting, for British figurative art, British painting in that respect. And I know that you see yourself across both here and in Australia. And in that time, you also have an exhibition with our mutual friend Dominic in Sydney, which will be a continuation of the respect they have for your art there as well. So I think we all really wish you the very best with those elements. We're looking forward to a time when we can have the works physically in front of us, and for you all to join us in a one-to-one discussion, and that thing you can't better, which is to stand in front of a wonderful work of art and see it in the whole and see it in the detail, as you've described so well, John. So thank you for a really beautiful insight into your work and working practice.